Hey everybody, Ryan McKnight here again. Second video. I got so worked up about that first video about Savannah's testimony that I decided to do a quick turnaround for video number 2. First I want to show you guys my shirt. This is my new shirt. I love it. Let me see if you guys can see it here. It says, "An angel with a sword made me do it." So those that get it, it's kind of a inside joke. Ex-Mormons probably get it, maybe some Mormons. Great shirt. It was sent to me by the people that made it. I'll put a link in the description to their Amazon page as a thank you to them. So anyway, yeah, my last video about Savannah's testimony really got me sort of worked up about this LGBT issue. So I wanted to make a little quick video, and I apologize for like the shadows and everything. I'm not a pro at this, so hopefully you focus more on the content of what I'm going to say as opposed to the production value. I'm not really savvy when it comes to that. So I want to talk about the LDS Church and its relationship with the LGBT community, and will there ever be acceptance? Now, first, let me just start off by saying that I don't pretend that anything that I'm about to say is anything that's sort of a unique idea of mine. I don't really think I invented any of these ideas or concepts that I'm about to talk about. Specifically, I know John Hamer has discussed some of the things that I'm going to talk about. I know he's discussed just one extent or another on the Infants on Thrones podcast. I think that I generally agree with him. It's been a while since I've listened to him talk about this subject, but if memory serves me, we kind of are on the same page on this issue, and other people have. So my point is that I'm not about to sort of like spill some sort of unique perspective on you. You know, maybe I can present it in a unique way, but the actual content is probably going to be something that you may have heard before. So the LDS Church, just quick sort of recap, if for those that are not really sure, the LDS Church has a history of rejecting LGBT people for many decades, and over 100 years. The official position of the church was that people chose to be gay. Basically, like most of society, and especially religious society, they kind of bought into that line that it was you had succumbed to Satan's temptation, and that you could easily just sort of be cured of it, or you could choose to be straight, whatever. And that was the church's sort of position. As awareness in society began to grow, and we learned more about what it meant to be homosexual or transgender, et cetera, and society in general became more accepting of it. I think that the LDS Church got into a position where they kind of had to massage their statements a little bit. Because if you read the stuff from the 70s and the 60s and the 50s, even the 80s and the 90s, it's pretty beyond the pale. I'm not even going to get into it, but you can easily look it up. And I think in around 2010, I could be a little off on that, but roughly in around 2010, the church quietly launched a website called mormonsandgays.org. I believe it's now been renamed to mormonandgay.org. So they got rid of the S's. And this was the first time that any official publication of the church recognized that people did not choose to be gay or transgender or what have you. So that was a huge step, although it was done quietly. I know I was an active member at the time. I had no idea that this website existed. And I was under the impression until 2013 when I left the church, I was under the impression that I believed myself, and I believed that the church taught that people chose to be gay. So they didn't really necessarily do a lot of education on this and let their members know about this shift. But nevertheless, they made that little shift sort of quietly. And if you kind of track the tone, I think a lot of people, including myself, when I started sort of paying attention to the issue, I'm not saying that the church was leading to, about to like accept LGBT people, but they were definitely softening their tone. noticeably, and I'm not the only person that thinks that. I think a lot of people, especially like liberal Mormons who were sort of on the liberal end of the political spectrum, which are a huge minority within Mormonism, they were holding out hope with the rhetoric that they were seeing. And then, of course, the infamous November policy happened, November 5th, 2015. And this was a shock to everybody, and including myself. It was kind of out of left field because everybody was sort of seeing the softening of the tone, and all of a sudden, boom. And the November policy, real quick, was that the children, it entailed a lot of things, but at its very core, it is that the children, minors, under 18, whose parents are in same-sex relationships, cannot participate in the ordinances of the LDS Church. Now, that includes being blessed as a baby, baptism, and then even going on a mission. So they advancements in the priesthood for young men. In order for them to do all these things after the policy, they have to meet two criteria. They must be 18 or older, and they must disavow their parents' same-sex relationship, which is ridiculous. Now, you might say, well, what's the big deal? Why would any gay person want their children to join the Mormon Church anyway? I would sort of agree with that statement at first, but that's not, that's being short-sighted. Here is how the policy had an effect on real people in real life. You have, I'll give two scenarios, okay? You have, let's say, a young man who comes out as gay, doesn't feel accepted in the church, so essentially leaves the church, gets married to a man, okay? So he's in a same-sex relationship. They adopt a child, or they have a baby from whatever means they have the baby. And let's say they live near the parents of this guy, of one of the men. And this man and both parents don't necessarily have any specific animosity towards the LDS Church. And so when his parents ask to take the child to church with them on Sundays, they say, sure, why not? Well, previously, now there was no problem with this. The child could go on Sunday. They could get baptized when they're 8. The parents are going to give permission. And they could, go through all the different steps if the child chose to do that. And as long as the parents were fine with it. After the November policy, now that child cannot do those things. The child can still go to church. But when all of their friends are getting baptized at 8 years old, even if their parents say it's okay, which was what the standard was before, they are not allowed to get baptized. So that can have a devastating effect, especially on young men who are, let's say they're 11 years old in this scenario and they've already gotten baptized and everything. Now it's time for them to get the priesthood, and all of a sudden you have to say to them, hey, we have a new policy. You got to wait till you're 18 and you got to reject your dad's marriage. And that happened in real life. And the other scenario I'll cover is, let's say you have a gay man who marries a straight woman. This happens all the time in the Mormon Church. And it can be flipped too with a woman. I'll just use the man as the example. It's probably more common. So gets married, they have some kids. He finally comes out to his wife. They get a divorce. Let's say it's relatively amicable. And he has, even though he leaves the church and maybe goes and, lives with a man or marries a man, has no problem with his children continuing through church. And then all of a sudden this new policy comes out, and now all of a sudden he has a son who's been spending the weekends with him, maybe maybe every other week with him, having a normal relationship, and all of a sudden his son, who's about to go on a mission, has to disavow his dad's marriage. Okay? These are the scenarios that put people in a tough spot. So anyway, that's a little sidebar from what I want to talk about. You have the LDS Church does not accept LGBT people, no matter what they tell you. Now they say, well, you can be LGBT as long as you're celibate or you don't act on it, whatever. That's such an unrealistic expectation to put on people. It's basically as if they won't. Now, a lot of ex-Mormons, a lot of liberal Mormons, a lot of progressive Mormons are convinced that the church will eventually, on their own or through force from some government mandate or something, they will eventually accept LGBT people in full fellowship. Now, what would full fellowship mean? Full fellowship would mean that they can do everything in the church, including get married in the temple to someone of the same sex. Anything less is it's all or nothing. Okay, they can't say, well, you can get baptized, but you can't do anything else, because that's what they had with black people, and that's just not going to fly. There's like a half measure. And anybody who's seen Breaking Bad, that's one of my favorite shows, knows that half measures are no good. Okay, so it's all or nothing. And many people are convinced that in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever it is, that the church is eventually going to make that move, because they did it with polygamy. They made the change. They did it with black people. They made the change, and maybe some other things that you can point out. So why wouldn't they do it, right, with LGBT people? Here's the thing. I don't think they will ever change. And it's not that I don't want them to change, okay? Don't get me wrong. I would love for nothing more than for them to change. And I would love to be proven wrong in what I'm about to say. But I'm going to maintain the position that they will never change. And what it boils down to is it's a business decision, okay? Forget, it's not a humanitarian decision. Changing would be the humane thing to do, okay? So if we were looking at it from a humanitarian position, then yes, I would agree. They're going to eventually change, but that's not what we have going on here. First and foremost, it's a business decision. Now, there is a huge difference between polygamy, blacks in the priesthood, or blacks being able to go to the temple, and LGBT people being accepted in full fellowship. And the difference is that accepting LGBT people fundamentally changes the core doctrine of the Mormon Church, which is the plan of salvation. And for the uninitiated, the plan of salvation, really quick, is we existed before we came to earth. We came to earth. We're being tested. We passed the test. Part of that test is that we get married to somebody of the opposite sex. And if we go through all of the right things, including that marriage, we can achieve the highest level of the celestial kingdom, the highest level of heaven. If you accept LGBT people in full fellowship, you now change the plan of salvation, which clearly, unequivocally, in everything ever taught up to today, states that it must involve the marriage of a man and a woman. It completely changes that. Now, PR, spin, public opinion, etc., can help. You can overcome a lot of things through those. You can overcome polygamy. You can overcome the institutional racism. I don't think you can overcome this one. And now let's come back to what I said before about it being a business decision, and this is why. If tomorrow the LDS Church says, we were wrong, we're sorry, tears in their eyes, they say, come, we accept you in full fellowship. Nobody who has left the church is going back, because nobody left the church just because of this issue. Now, it may have been a huge piece of the puzzle, but at this point, everybody's got a whole list of bullet points of why they've left the church. And they'll just maybe cross this one off, but there's still hundreds of other reasons why they're not going to go back to church. So they don't gain anybody, okay? They might help their recruitment a little bit, but people are still going to know about the history, and it's going to be very easy to find out that they just barely came around to this. So I don't think it's going to help the recruitment that much. And they will lose people over this, because people that are in the ultra-conservative camp, which is the majority of Mormons and the majority of tithe payers, okay, they are not going to be okay with this, because, like I said, this fundamentally changes the doctrine. Giving blacks the priesthood did not fundamentally change the doctrine. It still was a man and a woman sealed for time and all eternity, go to the celestial kingdom. That didn't change, okay? Polygamy did not fundamentally change the gospel because, as we know, there still is spiritual polygamy. A man can still be sealed to multiple women. Again, with the LGBT issue, you don't get that. So if they change because of all these factors, they gain nothing. Okay, I hope we can agree on that. They gain nothing other than maybe a kudos, from the mainstream media, from the ex-Mormons. I'll give them a kudos. They're not interested in kudos. Kudos is not money. And they stand to lose a lot. So it's a business decision. Right now, that equation is not in the church's favor. Now, is it possible that that equation ever flips and it becomes a good business decision to accept LGBT people in full fellowship? In theory, yes. In theory, you could project out and you could say eventually the church is losing so much money because of it that by changing it, they would reverse that. The problem is that the idea that people are not going to come back, that part's never going to go away. So if they get to the point where they're losing let's say 30 years from now, and they're just losing their shirts financially, they're still not going to gain anybody back. So I'm not really convinced that it ever becomes because more and more people are going to leave the church over this. And what you're going to have left, now here's where I think it's going to go, and I'll wrap this up really quick. So here's what I see is going to happen. I see a continued exodus for the LGBT issue and for other reasons, and the church is simply going to consolidate in numbers. The power will consolidate, the access to money will consolidate, and the church will become even more regional than it already is. And I could even see 100 years from now, when I'm no longer alive, the way that we see Amish people today, some crazy people in Pennsylvania who don't use electricity, whatever little generic statement you want to make. I think that people will say that about Mormons. Oh, they're those crazy people in Utah that don't like gay people. I really do think it'll become to that. And it doesn't mean there's not going to be any more Mormons in Europe or in South America, but it's going to be negligible. And that outside of Utah, it'll be negligible. And I think that is really the only thing that they can do to survive. I think that they have too much to lose if they side with LGBT issues, okay? Because all those hardcore conservatives that make up that tithing base, okay, they don't want to upset that base. And the other factor is this. Everybody says, oh, well, once David Bednar dies and you have a whole new leadership, in place, they'll be more open-minded. Well, who do you think is going to be choosing those replacements? Okay, the current apostles, who will never change, they're the ones choosing their replacements as they come along. And they're choosing like-minded people. Now, of course, eventually somebody liberal enough to maybe make this move could eventually be in place. But you've got to get 15 people. It has to be unanimous, okay? And it has to be a good business decision, and I just don't think it ever will. I think that there's going to be enough young people my age, younger than me, that will share the same anti-LGBT sentiment within the Mormon Church they will simply move up the ranks, and those will be the leaders. They're not going to put a supporter, an advocate of LGBT rights in positions of power in the LDS Church. It's just not going to happen. I want to be proven wrong. And here's why. I don't care about the church. I really don't. The church can grow, the church can shrink, the church can fall, the church can succeed. It makes no difference to me. I want them to change because no matter how many people leave over LGBT issues, there will always be people born LGBT within the church. And I want them to have a safer place to grow up in. I want them to be less likely to suffer from depression. I want them to be less likely to commit suicide. In that sense, I hope that they change. I just don't see the path. I want to be proven wrong. Type in the comments about how I'm wrong. Convince me that I'm wrong. You know, maybe if there's a bunch of good arguments, maybe I'll do a follow-up video. Other than that, that's all I got for this video. Peace.